Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not threaten, plead, or seek permission. Instead, she placed a signed royal decree before Camilla and calmly announced that the queen would no longer be permitted to issue private instructions to palace staff, influence ceremonial appointments, or speak on behalf of the crown without written approval. Camilla froze. Charles stared at the document. In one devastating moment, the balance of power inside the monarchy changed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne held Camilla's gaze as the silence hardened. The Royal Household Conduct Decree, a formal order controlling how senior royals may direct palace business, had already been approved through channels required to protect the sovereign's authority. It stripped the queen of her ability to command senior aides, alter ceremonial plans, or present personal wishes as decisions made by the king. Camilla would keep her title, but every official instruction would now require written approval. Camilla reached toward the document, then stopped. Her fingers hovered above the royal seal as she turned to Charles, expecting anger, protection, perhaps instant rejection. He gave her none. The king removed his glasses, placed them beside the decree, and looked at his sister with shock deeper than fury. "Do you understand what you have done?" he asked. Anne did not retreat. She slid the paper closer and answered, "From this moment forward, the crown speaks through the king, not through private influence." Charles felt the room close around him. The decree mattered because palace staff had begun receiving instructions they believed carried his authority, even when he had never approved them. It also mattered because ceremonial appointments shape public loyalty, military honor, and the visible order of the royal family. A private preference could no longer masquerade as a sovereign command. Anne opened the file beside her. Inside were instructions, altered schedules, disputed appointments, and documented accounts from aides who had recorded when Camilla's wishes were presented as royal decisions. One recorded conversation showed a senior courtier questioning an order, only to be told that resistance would disappoint both the queen and the monarch. Camilla lifted the decree, but her face changed before she reached the second page. Charles understood. His sister had not acted over one insult or one ceremony. She had assembled a case strong enough to survive his anger and Camilla's denial. Now he faced the choice Anne had forced into the open: defend his wife, or defend the authority of the crown. But before he could choose, everyone in that room had to confront what they stood to lose. Behind the decree stood three people bound by family, duty, and years of unspoken resentment. Anne believed she was defending the monarchy from quiet manipulation. Camilla saw the order as a calculated attempt to strip away the respect she had fought decades to earn. Charles stood between them, wounded by the conflict and terrified by its implications. This was no longer a disagreement over palace procedure. It was a battle over trust, loyalty, and the meaning of royal authority. Anne had spent most of her life serving without asking to stand closer to the throne. She accepted difficult duties, punishing schedules, and public responsibility because she believed the institution mattered more than personal comfort. The monarchy, the system built around the sovereign and the working royal family, had survived because people respected limits. Now she feared that staying silent would help private influence become royal authority. To her, that would betray everything her mother had protected. Camilla carried a different wound. She had endured years of hostility before gaining acceptance beside Charles, and every public appearance had demanded control. The queen consort, the title given to the wife of a reigning king, believed her place had been earned through loyalty and suffering. That made the decree feel brutally personal. It did not merely regulate her actions. It suggested that the trust she had fought to build could still be withdrawn. Charles waited until his wife left the council room. Then he closed the door, turned toward his sister, and asked quietly, "Why did you not come to me first?" Anne felt the pain behind the question, but she did not soften the truth. She reminded him of 3 private warnings: 2 documented conversations, and 1 written note delivered through his secretary. Each time, the king had delayed, changed the subject, or promised the tension would settle without intervention. Camilla returned to her private sitting room with anger pressing against humiliation. She removed a bracelet with trembling fingers and told a trusted aide that Anne had always mistaken coldness for integrity. The monarch's wife insisted the decree had been designed to embarrass her. Yet even as she spoke, she understood why Charles had not destroyed it immediately. Charles feared both possible choices. If he overturned the order before reading the evidence, the palace could believe his wife controlled him. If he supported Anne, he could break the woman who had stood beside him through years of public judgment. Neither path protected everyone. William had already added silent weight to the conflict. Anne had informed the prince before the meeting that a formal intervention was coming. He had not endorsed every accusation, but he had refused to oppose the action. That silence mattered, because the future king understood that unclear authority could one day become his burden. Anne believed her brother had protected Camilla for too long. The queen believed his sister had never truly accepted her. Charles felt betrayed by both women for forcing a family wound into the machinery of the crown. Yet the decree had not begun with jealousy, title, or pride. It had begun with one specific incident Anne could no longer forgive. The point of no return came during preparations for a national remembrance ceremony, when a private instruction was issued under the king's name without his direct approval. A senior royal was removed from the central procession, a military tribute was altered, and palace staff were told the decision was final. Anne discovered the change only hours before the ceremony. What she uncovered afterward convinced her that the monarchy was no longer facing a misunderstanding, but a dangerous breach of trust. Anne stopped in the palace corridor when she saw the amended procession card in a senior equerry's hands. The Sovereign's Remembrance Service, a national ceremony honoring those who died in military service, carried deep personal weight for her after decades of public duty and military association. Her place directly behind Charles had been removed. In its place stood 2 representatives favored by Camilla, while the Princess Royal had been pushed farther back in the order. Anne looked at the officer and asked one question: "Who authorized this?" The equerry hesitated, lowered his voice, and pointed toward a handwritten instruction, marked as coming from Their Majesties, the formal phrase used when an order is presented as carrying the joint authority of the king and queen. The wording made the change appear settled. No debate, no appeal, no warning. Camilla had crossed more than a ceremonial line. The procession determined who stood closest to the sovereign during a moment of national mourning, and that position carried meaning far beyond pride. It signaled trust, service, and public importance. For Anne, being moved was painful. Seeing Charles's authority used without his knowledge was unforgivable. Charles read the card twice after the ceremony. He stood alone with his sister, then looked toward Camilla's closed office door without speaking. The king had approved no alteration, and the silence that followed confirmed Anne's fear. Someone had taken a private preference and dressed it as a royal command. Camilla defended herself later in a recorded private conversation preserved by a palace secretary. She argued that the ceremony needed modernization and claimed Anne's position projected an outdated image of the monarchy. The queen insisted she had acted to protect the institution, not weaken her husband. Yet she never denied giving the instruction. Anne did not argue. She simply requested every household order, issued under joint royal authority, during the previous 6 months. The review uncovered altered ceremonial placements, redirected meetings, pressure placed on staff, and personal requests presented as final decisions from the sovereign. Each document deepened the wound. Midnight brought clarity. Anne placed the evidence beside a blank page and signed the first draft of the Royal Household Conduct Decree, a formal safeguard limiting how senior royals could issue official instructions. She knew the signature would end polite silence forever. The past had provided the evidence, but the next confrontation would determine whether Camilla accepted the limit or dared Anne to enforce it. Camilla entered the second meeting prepared to fight. Anne arrived carrying the original instruction cards, staff memoranda, and the sealed decree. Charles sat between them, but the room no longer recognized him as its emotional center. Years of resentment surfaced in carefully controlled sentences. Then Camilla accused Anne of attempting to humiliate her before the family. Anne leaned forward, met her eyes, and delivered the sentence that ended all pretense. "You will not command in his name again." Charles remained at the head of the table, while Camilla sat to his right, and Anne faced her from across the room. One legal secretary waited nearby, only to verify the document and record whether its terms were accepted. The decree, a formal order governing how senior royals may direct palace business, lay between them, like a judgment no one could ignore. Camilla pushed it away. She declared that no member of the family had the right to regulate how she supported her husband, and her voice carried years of buried anger. The Queen insisted that marriage gave her a duty to advise Charles and protect his reign. Anne answered without raising her tone. "Private advice was personal," she said, "but instructions sent to royal staff under the king's name became official acts." Camilla's control broke. She accused Anne of resenting the marriage, the title, and the place she had earned beside the sovereign. She said this confrontation had never been about procedure. It was punishment disguised as duty. Anne's restraint cracked only slightly. She placed the altered remembrance procession card on the table and pushed it toward Charles. The Princess Royal asked whether Camilla understood what it meant to borrow the monarch's authority without his knowledge. The question struck harder than any accusation, because the evidence was already there. Charles reached for the card. He recognized the instruction, read the handwritten wording, and fell silent. Then the king looked at his wife and asked whether she had approved the change without consulting him. Camilla admitted it. She said she believed he would have agreed because he had often complained about rigid ceremonial traditions. The Queen argued that she had acted on his known wishes, not against them. Anne rejected that defense at once. Assumed approval was not royal consent. A passing complaint was not an order. Private closeness did not allow anyone to turn a personal opinion into a command carrying the authority of the crown. Camilla turned toward Charles and demanded that he cancel the decree immediately. He did not. Instead, the monarch ordered every memorandum, instruction card, and staff account to be formally reviewed. His wife stared at him as though the deepest betrayal had come from his silence. Charles's refusal to rescue Camilla changed the confrontation, but the true force behind Anne's decree had not yet been revealed. Anne's power did not come from rank alone. She had built the decree through years of service, trust, and a network of senior figures who believed the monarchy could not survive if personal influence became indistinguishable from sovereign command. The document before Camilla was not an emotional protest. It was a carefully constructed safeguard, and when Charles opened the accompanying file, he discovered that Anne had already secured the support of the one person Camilla could not dismiss. Anne could not overrule the sovereign, and she had never pretended otherwise. Yet she could trigger a formal household conduct review when palace employees reported conflicting instructions or commands issued without proper approval. That review was an internal process designed to determine who had authorized official decisions and whether staff had been placed under improper pressure. The decree did not remove Camilla's title. It controlled procedure, requiring written confirmation before anyone altered royal schedules, ceremonial positions, senior appointments, or messages carrying the king's authority. William had understood the danger before the confrontation began. Alone in his office, he read Anne's draft twice and stood over the final page for several silent minutes. The prince knew his signature would wound Charles and place him against Camilla, but he also understood what the confusion could one day become. As the future king, he feared inheriting a household where private relationships could bypass responsibility and leave loyal staff guessing which command was real. William finally signed a documented statement supporting clear written authority. He did not accuse the Queen of malice. Instead, he warned that any system allowing personal wishes to appear as sovereign decisions would eventually damage both the monarch and those serving him. The future king had chosen procedure over comfort, knowing the choice would follow him back into the family. Charles discovered the endorsement halfway through Anne's file. His face changed as he recognized his son's signature beneath the carefully measured words. The king looked up and told his sister that involving William had transformed a private dispute into a judgment on his leadership. Anne did not deny it. She answered that his leadership was already being judged every time an aide received an order in his name that he had never approved. Her documented review revealed that several senior staff members had prepared resignation letters, fearing they would eventually be blamed for following unauthorized instructions. Their concern mattered because palace officials protected continuity, public trust, and the daily operation of the crown. Losing them during a family crisis could have turned private confusion into visible institutional failure. Camilla could dismiss Anne's anger as resentment, but she could not dismiss evidence, staff testimony, and the heir's written support. The Princess Royal had succeeded because she had transformed private alarm into accountable procedure. With William's support exposed and Charles's authority under scrutiny, the decree moved from threat to reality, and the first consequences arrived before the palace doors had even closed. The fallout began quietly. No proclamation was read, no title was removed. Yet by the following morning, Camilla discovered that the machinery around her had changed. Instructions once accepted with a nod now required written confirmation. Meetings were redirected through the king's office. Senior aides who had once hurried to satisfy her requests began pausing before answering. The decree had not taken away her crown, but it had stripped away something nearly as powerful: the assumption that no one would question her. Camilla opened the engagement folder and ordered a ceremonial visit moved by 2 days. Her private secretary did not immediately agree. Instead, he explained that the request now required approval through the sovereign's office, the department that formally confirms decisions made in the king's name. The queen stared at him, slowly closed the folder, and said, "So this is how they intend to make me disappear." The decree had changed every official instruction into a recorded act. Schedules, appointments, ceremonial positions, and public messages now required written confirmation, removing the uncertainty that had once allowed personal wishes to appear as joint royal commands. That mattered because staff could no longer be pressured into guessing what Charles wanted. It also mattered because every future dispute would leave a clear trail of responsibility. Anne received confirmation that the new system had been activated before noon. She read the notice twice, then set it down without satisfaction. The Princess Royal had achieved what she believed was necessary, but duty offered no comfort. She knew the measure had wounded her brother and had turned years of family tension into a structure Charles could no longer ignore. Camilla began contacting former allies through private calls and carefully worded messages. She asked whether the decree exceeded Anne's authority, and whether someone would challenge its interpretation. No one agreed. The evidence was documented. William had supported the principle, and palace aides feared being accused of bypassing the monarch. People who once worried about disappointing the queen now worried that standing too close to her could destroy their careers. Charles noticed the change at dinner. Camilla's place remained untouched, and she refused every request to speak about the review. The king understood that the decree was no longer confined to files and offices. It had entered their marriage, placing silence where trust had once been. Late that night, Charles opened the evidence alone. One memorandum carried his name beneath an instruction he had never given. He read it again, pressed a hand to his forehead, and finally understood why Anne had acted. The truth hurt, because it offered him no easy defense. Charles sent one final message before leaving the room. He requested a private meeting with his sister, without Camilla, William, advisors, or lawyers present. For the first time since the decree was issued, brother and sister would speak without titles, witnesses, or the protection of palace procedure. Charles met Anne in a small private room, where no aides waited outside and no official record would be kept. The king who entered was not angry. He was exhausted. Anne expected a demand, perhaps even a warning. Instead, her brother asked one question: "When did you stop believing I could control this?" The answer forced them both to confront a truth larger than Camilla, larger than the decree, and more painful than either had prepared to admit. Charles poured 2 glasses of water himself, placed one before his sister, and sat opposite her. The decree remained unopened between them. It was no longer merely a document. It had become a dividing line between the husband he wanted to be and the sovereign he was required to remain. The king admitted that he had defended Camilla for so many years that questioning her now felt like betraying the person he had once promised to protect. Anne felt no victory. She told him that shielding Camilla from cruelty had been honorable, especially after years of public anger and private judgment. But protecting the queen from accountability was different. It endangered them both, because every command issued without clear approval weakened Charles's authority and placed palace staff in impossible positions. Anne then revealed her deepest fear through a private, unrecorded confession to her brother. She believed he had become isolated from honest advice. Courtiers hesitated to challenge Camilla because they feared any objection would be treated as an attack on the marriage itself. That silence mattered, because a monarch who heard only agreement could no longer tell loyalty from fear. Charles lowered his eyes. He admitted that the evidence had crossed a boundary he could not defend. Instructions had been issued in his name, staff had been pressured, and his reluctance to confront the problem had allowed it to grow. Love had become hesitation. Hesitation had become permission. Charles finally opened the decree. He took out a pen and signed a permanent authorization, keeping it in force. Then he added one crucial clause. Every senior working royal, including Anne and William, would follow the same written command procedure. The rule would no longer appear to punish one woman. It would become a safeguard binding the entire family. Anne accepted immediately. Her answer proved that she had never sought special power. She wanted responsibility to carry a name, a signature, and a clear line of authority. Charles looked at his sister and spoke with painful honesty. "You have wounded me," he said, "but perhaps only because you were willing to say what everyone else was too frightened to say." Anne reached across the table, not as an enforcer, but as his sister. Charles rose with the decree in his hand. He now had to face Camilla without excuses, delay, or protection. The family had reached its decision in private, but by sunrise, the world outside the palace would discover that something extraordinary had happened. By dawn, the decree was no longer a palace secret. Britain awoke to a royal crisis, framed not as scandal, but as an unprecedented restriction placed upon the Queen from inside her own family. Broadcasters interrupted normal programming. Newspapers rushed out altered front pages. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, searching for signs of movement behind closed gates. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any headline. Anne arriving for duty alone, expression steady, while the palace remained silent. The London Chronicle reached newsstands with Anne's photograph beneath 4 brutal words. "The princess draws the line." Minutes later, a national broadcaster opened its morning report with a recorded announcement. For the first time in the modern reign, a queen's informal authority has been formally limited by the royal household. The royal household, the staff and offices that organize the sovereign's official duties, had suddenly become the center of a national argument about power. Crowds pressed toward the gates of Buckingham Palace. Some held small Union flags, and praised Anne for protecting Charles. Others accused her of humiliating Camilla and turning a family dispute into public punishment. The division mattered because the monarchy depended not only on law, but on public belief that those closest to the crown respected its boundaries. Anne noticed the crowd as her car slowed near the entrance. She tightened her grip on her gloves and kept her eyes forward. The Princess Royal refused to acknowledge either the cheers or the criticism. Yet the silence around her carried a painful truth. She had protected the institution, but she had also become the face of its deepest fracture. Camilla saw the headline in private. She read every word, folded the newspaper with exact care, and asked for the television to be switched off before the report reached Anne's arrival. The Queen could endure anger, but watching her rival praised for restricting her authority cut deeper than open insult. Charles authorized an official statement before midday. The palace described the decree as a modernization of internal accountability, applying equally to all senior working royals. That phrase confirmed his new clause, without revealing the confrontation that had forced it into existence. Public opinion shifted when a documented account of the Remembrance Procession change reached broadcasters. The crisis was no longer presented simply as Anne attacking Camilla. It became a question of whether anyone, however close to the sovereign, could issue commands in his name without direct approval. William faced that question during a scheduled engagement. When a reporter asked whether he supported Anne, the prince paused before answering. Clarity protects every member of this family, including the king. His words carried the endorsement Charles had hoped to keep private. Charles made one final decision. He would appear at the next major royal engagement with Camilla on one side and Anne on the other. When the king finally stepped forward with both women beside him, the monarchy delivered its answer without another decree needing to be spoken. The final verdict came not through another confrontation, but through a deliberate act of unity. Charles appeared in public with Camilla on one side and Anne on the other. No one smiled easily. No wound had vanished. Yet the arrangement carried a clear message. The Queen would remain beside the King. The Princess Royal would remain trusted, and the decree would stand. The monarchy had chosen accountability over private influence, without destroying the family that had been forced to confront it. Charles paused before they entered the royal engagement. He looked first at Camilla, then at Anne, and spoke with a firmness neither woman could mistake. "We walk in together, or we do not walk in at all." The king understood that this moment mattered, because the public needed proof that the family had not collapsed. It also mattered because unity without accountability would have been empty, while accountability without unity could have torn the crown apart. Camilla turned toward Anne before they moved forward. The queen admitted that she would never forgive the way the decree had been delivered, but she now understood why Charles could not overturn it. The Royal Household Conduct Decree, a permanent rule requiring written approval for official commands with institutional consequences, would apply equally to her, Anne, William, and every senior working royal. Anne did not celebrate. She answered that forgiveness had never been the purpose. Her goal was to prevent the king's authority from being used without his knowledge. The Princess Royal accepted the same restrictions without hesitation, proving that she had not fought for personal control, a greater title, or special privilege. She had fought for a clear boundary no one could quietly cross again. Charles carried the deepest lesson. His instinct to protect Camilla had once come from love, but love had slowly weakened necessary limits. The monarch now understood that defending his wife from cruelty was not the same as shielding her from responsibility. Anne had forced him to separate marriage from leadership, and the pain of that choice had finally made him stronger. Camilla kept her title, her marriage, and her public role. She did not leave defeated. Yet the unchecked influence that created the crisis was gone. Anne gained nothing visible, but her victory lay in restoring clarity and accepting that the same discipline now governed her. The crisis proved that loyalty was not silent obedience. True loyalty sometimes demanded the courage to confront those closest to the throne, before private weakness became institutional damage. Anne silenced Camilla not by destroying her, but by ending the confusion between personal influence and royal command. Charles had been stunned, because the decree exposed what he had avoided. By allowing it to stand, he preserved both his marriage and the authority of the crown. The family walked forward carrying scars that would not quickly fade. But the monarchy emerged stronger, because one woman had finally spoken, when silence had become the greater betrayal. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.